بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. تبارك الذي بيده الملك على كل شيء قدير، الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا، وهو العزيز الغفور، الذي خلق 7 سماوات طباقا، ما ترى في خلق الرحمن من تفاوت، ارجع البصر هل ترى من فطور، ثم ارجع البصر كرتين ينقلب إليك البصر خاسئا وهو حسير، ولقد زينا السماء الدنيا بمصابيح وجعلناها رجوما للشياطين وأعتدنا لهم عذاب السعير، وللذين كفروا بربهم عذاب جهنم وبئس المصير.
جزاك الله خير.
ما شاء الله. جزاك الله خير for that. جزاك الله خير for that. Jazakallah for all parents joining our event today titled Balancing the Use of Social Media with Islamic Values. Obviously, in today's day and age, social media has had a huge impact on our lives. And some argue that it's had a positive impact on our lives. Some argue it's had a negative impact on our lives. And what we want to touch upon today is the impact of social media upon our lives and how Islam should govern the usage of social media, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our creator, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us laws which we need to govern our lives by. And social media is one of those aspects of life which we use heavily. And what we want to discuss today is how Islam should govern the usage of social media when we use social media. And what I'll do before we dive into the presentation, inshallah, we'll do a quick brief introduction of the three speakers. I'll be one of the speakers. Brother Jamil and Brother Ghulam will be the other speakers. In terms of my background, I've been in Redbridge for almost 4 years now. I've got 3 children who go to who attend the local schools. When I moved to this area, I had concern about parenting, given the challenges that our children face today. I'm a firm believer in the fact that we need to safeguard the Islamic values of our children. Our children, need to have a strong foundation in Islam. And as a result of that, I discussed this with some of the local brothers that I know in the local area, and we decided to form the Redbridge Muslim Parents Association, who's arranged today's event. And the objective of the Redbridge Muslim Parents Association is to bring parents together so that we can share ideas about parenting, discuss the challenges that we as parents face and our children face, and discuss these challenges from an Islamic point of view, and discuss how Islam can solve the challenges that we as parents face and our children's face. Over to you, Ghulam. Would you like to introduce yourself, inshallah?
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. My name is Ghulam. So I'm quite a new parent. I have a son 2 years old. I was first introduced to the Muslim Parents Forum when I lived in Waltham Forest, and I saw the good work that the Parents Forum was doing in terms of organizing events which were relevant to new parents such as myself, and talking about a lot of issues such as SRE, social media, and topics like these. So these are obviously issues that affect me. And I'm very interested in being a better parent by developing my knowledge in these areas.
Jazakallah for that, Ghulam. Jamil, would you like to introduce yourself, inshallah?
Yeah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. My name is Jamil. I've got 4 beautiful kids, mashallah. You just heard from Baraka, she's in the middle. I've got an older son who's 13, thinks he's 20. And the youngest one is 3 years old, and then the other daughter is 7. I've been involved with different massages, different youth teams over the last 15, 17 years. And I'm very passionate about ensuring that our children are cultured in the right way, they understand Islam, and they live by Islam as much as they can.
Jazakallah khair for that, Brother Jamil. So the format of today's event, there's going to be 3 presentations, inshallah. The first presentation will be delivered by Brother Ghulam on the topic of social media's impact on our lives. I'll deliver the second presentation, how social media is seen in the context of purpose of life and values. And Brother Jamil will deliver the final presentation on safety tips for social media usage. And after each presentation, there will be a breakout session for about 5 minutes. And in these breakout sessions, parents will have the opportunity to discuss the presentation that's been delivered. And you as parents will have the opportunity to share your ideas with the speakers. And if there's any concerns, any questions that parents have, they can raise these during the breakout sessions after each presentation, inshallah. And then at the end, the final segment of the event, there'll basically be another opportunity at the end of the event whereby parents, again, will have the opportunity to discuss any other items that we may have not raised today in relation to social media. But if parents believe that there's a need to discuss other items that have not been raised, parents will have the opportunity at the end as well, inshallah, to raise their concerns or questions in relation to what we're discussing today, inshallah. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Ghulam, and Ghulam, he'll basically deliver the first presentation titled Social Media's Impact on Our Lives. Over to you, Ghulam, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. So, so there's a couple of points. Firstly, regarding social media usage right now in the UK. So the first point is that there are only two industries that I know of that describe its users as users, and that's illegal drugs and social media. In any other industry, whether it's in banking or whether it's in retail, generally the users are not described as users, but they're described as customers. And that's because you pay for the service. But when it comes to illegal drugs and social media, we're described in this way because the number one point with social media is that it's generally a free product. And there's a saying in the tech industry that when the product is free, then you are the product. And that's what a lot of people have come to realize with social media, is that they are in fact the product, not the service that they're using. Now, the link with that and illegal drugs is that it's well known now, the addictive nature of social media and its relationship in that sense with illegal drugs, which are highly addictive and have a damaging effect on the long-term health of an individual. Now, in the UK, around 1 in 3 adults have begun to slash their usage of social media, and that shouldn't be surprising when 1 in 3 adults in the last 12 months, because of these reasons that are in the graph, in the graph there. And the number one being a sense of overload of information. The internet age was meant to bring together the world's information in an easy and accessible format. And it seems that we have come to a point where it's too easy and there's too much of it. And this addiction is felt by everyone. Anyone you speak to, if you begin not yet, so if we can stick to the first slide.
Sorry, my bad.
And this addiction that we're feeling through social media, and you can start this conversation with any member of your family, any circle of friends, or with your work friends. You begin a conversation on social media, and the first couple of things people will say is that they feel overloaded by it, overwhelmed by it, addicted. There's lack of trust, and it's time wasting. Everyone will make these comments. So everyone is generally feeling that they want to disengage or disconnect from social media. Whether they've done it or not is another issue. Now, this addiction to social media, as I'll be describing now, isn't by accident, it's by design. So behind applications like WhatsApp, Facebook, and YouTube are teams of some of the most highly skilled engineers in the world whose sole aim is to keep eyeballs on the screen to watch adverts. When Mark Zuckerberg was asked in an American committee hearing on social media usage, he was asked, how do you make money? And he said, we run ads. That's the way they make money. It's not through improving content. These are all means and mechanisms to deliver advertisements to its users. And if we get that about all social media, that they are all based upon pretty much exactly the same model, I think we'd all have a good rethink about how we engage with these apps. So if we can go to the next slide, please.
Sure.
So the question is, why are we using them? So I break down apps into two main groups. One I will call a supplement type of app, and the second is a painkiller app. The supplement apps are generally very good. They help us. They solve specific problems like banking. Now we can transfer money very easily without having to call up someone, wait in a queue. We can track our health, our weight, what we're eating, all excellent usage of an application on our phone. Google has changed our lives. It has changed history to a certain extent in terms of the amount of information that we can access in a short space of time, literally within fractions of a second. So those are supplement apps. Then we have the painkiller apps. I describe them as painkiller because they don't satisfy a certain or clear defined need. We simply find them easy to use and attractive. So painkiller apps, we use them when we're bored. We use them when generally we want to entertain ourselves. And that applies for generally for all the different types of social media app. If we can move on to the next slide, if we can keep that in mind as well about the painkiller. So then the question is, why are we using these painkiller apps? How does it happen? Well, all social media, well, the big ones like Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, and we'll talk about a lot of these in the third presentation. They actually have a model, and this model, a mathematical model, was designed by a Stanford professor called B.J. Fogg. And I'll give you the book recommendation at the end of this presentation. And he split up and he actually defined a formula of how to create habits in people. And the formula was very simple. A lot of us might even know it without having to read this, but he explains it in detail. And he copied this model from American casinos. And they're the ones who really precisely solve this problem, what they, in their view, of how do we build addiction in people. And the model was B, which is behavior, equals motivation, the ability of an individual, and a trigger. So let me give you an example from B.J. Fogg. B.J. Fogg, he's a Stanford professor. He was, like a lot of professors and academics, he was overweight. So he said, he came up with this model. He said, look, if I wanted to lose weight, I need to think of something which has low motivation, which requires not a lot of motivation. So at the bottom end of the graph, and it's really easy to do. And at that single moment, so in the fourth arrow from in the bottom right, it needs to be somewhere there. And that's where the trigger needs to be. And if the trigger is there for that action, then I'm probably going to carry out that exercise. So the number one issue for a lot of people who are overweight is two things. They don't do enough exercise and they eat the wrong foods. So he said, every time that I go to the toilet, after I come out, I'm going to do 2 press-ups. So he started to do that and he kept it up for a couple of months and he started to lose weight. So that required a low motivation and it was really easy to do. So low motivation because when you come out of the toilet, you feel a bit more relaxed, and 2 press-ups is not a lot. So it's really easy to do. And the trigger there is mentally, he'll say, I'm going to do this action. And that was the action line. And the social media companies, they use this model to work out how to get people addicted to apps. So think about it like this. We've all got iPhotos on our phone, but why is it that we can share pictures in text messages, which is fine, people do that. But then when Instagram came about, how did an application, which fundamentally all it does is allow you to share pictures and look at pictures of other people, but that's what Facebook was doing. That's what you could do on WhatsApp. There were lots of apps doing exactly the same thing. But what Instagram managed to do was make it easy. So there was a low motivation needed and it was really easy to do. So the trigger was simply things like notifications or an increased ability to like them or an increased ability to share them. So if you have these 3 criteria, you will form what's known as a habit. So there's a certain feeling or motivation, which is a prerequisite for opening an application at all. And this could be, for example, the anticipation we feel when our mobile phone vibrates, but it can also be the fear of missing out. So then they decided, then they came up with this new thing at the time called the notification. Notifications weren't by default in all of our phones, but they realized when the phone is on sleep and it's on the table, how do we get people to pick it up? And so they decided that we're going to create this notification so that when you get a message or when you get a like, that a notification will pop up on your phone and then people will pick it up. So now you can, and these are things that you can actually monitor, and people are working it out. And this is not groundbreaking concepts, but when you intentionally apply this model to any action that you want to generate, it works. And it works because it's in line with our nature, that is essentially taking the path of least resistance. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So time. Here I'm going to prove it to everyone. And you can do it right now if you want, or you can do it later. But ask yourself, how many hours do you think you spend on the phone, and then check? And I do this with all of my family, and it's really fun because you'll get people who will say, you know, I'm so busy, I can't do this and I can't do that. And then I say, okay, let's have a look at your phone. If they've got iPhone, we open up screen time, and they've got 6 hours a day on average spent on their phone. Number 1, WhatsApp. Number 2, YouTube. Number 3, messages. Number 4, Google. And it's like you're spending 8 hours a day at work, 6 hours on the phone, 8 hours is sleeping. The maths doesn't add up. So what is actually happening is that the 8 hours someone thinks they're spending at work, really they're probably spending about 3 or 4 hours at work, and the other 4 hours are dilly-dallying on the phone. On average, globally, people spend about 3.5 hours on the phone, with the top 20% spending about 4.5 hours. Now, if you do the maths and you break down your day, this is crazy amount of time spent on the phone. And this is the objective of these companies, is to increase the amount of time we spend on these phones to receive those adverts. So for myself personally, these are actually my statistics from a couple of weeks ago. My average is now 1.5 hours. My current average is just below 59 minutes. And my objective is to actually keep it decreasing below that. So I've deleted all social media on my phone. The only thing I've got is text messages and phone calls. And the rest of the applications on my phone are all supplement apps. And that's part of my model of being a bit more productive. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So what are we really doing with social media? I've got this image here of all the social media apps, and it equals that device on the right-hand side is called a router. So everyone's got one in their house. A router is essentially a device that connects you to a server in America or some other place in the world. And that router receives that information, and it passes that information onto your phones and to your laptops. And that's my understanding and view now of what social media apps are, including email. These apps are all routers, but we are becoming those routers. So we don't need to become those routers. We need to view it like that. That when you're typing information into an application or a social media application or an email, you're passing information around. But that's exactly what a router does. So we should treat them as methods of communication and what they really are, which is sources of entertainment and distraction. So social media is a means and it's not an end. Now let me prove it through a couple of points. If we go to the next slide, please. The first point I want to make is that I said in my first slide is that making social media addictive is not by accident. No, you've gone way too far, sorry. So these are not accidents, these are by design. And one thing with teenagers and parents, what we all think about things like, are my kids behaving Islamically, and are they I've only got 5 minutes left. Are they behaving well with people and all of that? There's a new thing we need to think about, and that's their attention. We should view our attention as currency. If you look on the left-hand side, you'll see these numbers of the notifications, and you can easily feel like your life is chaotic if your phone looks like that, but you shouldn't. The image on the bottom left, the 3 dots, those are called ellipses. This was designed by Apple and social media companies to keep you hooked on, that when you write a message, that image will appear so that you don't drop your phone. It's the same way when you write an email, you stop looking at that email once you've clicked send. But the social media companies, they weren't happy with that. They were like, no, we need to keep this person hooked on. So you put the ellipsis and the person will wait for the message, and maybe they might open an app while they're waiting. I know friends who say that their kids, in the time between the Netflix episode of a story and another Netflix episode, which is literally 10 seconds, they'll open up their tablets and start playing a YouTube video in that 10 seconds. That's extreme attention deficit disorder with these kids. But this is what the currency is. If we move on, please, to the next slide. I'm going to try and next slide. So I've got 5 social media myths. Number 1, social media is not a fundamental technology. It's not the same way we treat like a car. A car is a fundamental piece of technology, or electricity. These are fundamental, but social media is not. It is a race to the bottom of the brainstem. Like you saw on that graph, social media aims to get you to do things which require low motivation and are very easy to do, and then there's a trigger. So social media apps, they are all aiming for that bottom of the brainstem, which doesn't require a lot of thinking at all. If we can move on to the next slide. Now, the same way people who are trying to lose weight, or people who are trying to give up a certain addiction, some people rely on willpower, but willpower in this situation is not enough to change our habits. Habits grow over time, so we need major reactions. And these major reactions are things like what my suggestion is to remove these apps. It's a bit extreme, but I feel that in this day and age, and there's a book that I recommend for everyone to read, it's called Deep Work by Carl Newport. He argues that in this day and age, the number one place for value, or what the market values for work, is the knowledge economy. And the knowledge economy requires high periods of concentration and focused work. We can't do that if we allow our attention to be taken away by distractions like social media and heavy phone usage. This needs to be heavily controlled. But the way we control them is, for example, switching phones off, or not even being connected to these apps in the first place. If we move on to the next slide, please. So like I said, social media, one of the myths is that it helps me learn Islam technical knowledge, keep up to date with news, or learn recipes. My point here is this, is that the top companies in the world today, with the exception of Saudi Aramco, are data companies. They are worth trillions in their aggregate. So the economy now, it values people who are highly skilled and can concentrate for long periods of time. There's a reason why data companies are the most valuable, is because the people that work there are the smartest, the most intelligent, and they're able to produce work at extreme high. You've gone too far. They're able to produce work at extremely high quality, and that requires deep work. But deep work has to be done without distraction. An example that other people may know about, okay, I've only got 2 minutes, but is, for example, people like Roald Dahl, one of the best authors in the world. He wrote some of the most creative books known to us in a shed at the bottom of his garden. If you think about books as creative as Matilda and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, they were written in a shed at the bottom of his garden. And in his shed, he didn't have pictures or any type of furniture there. It was an empty shed. But he would simply concentrate for long periods and come up with these very, very creative ideas. If we move on to the next slide. The fourth social media myth is that if you have no online presence, then you have no presence. This isn't real. It doesn't mean that you are going to be someone like living in a cave, like a Luddite. Yeah, that's not true. According to Oxford University, we each have on average about 155 Facebook friends. But in reality, we only trust and want to meet about 4 or 5 of them. My advice is put the effort in meeting and updating those 4 or 5, not the other 150 you really don't care about. So we might be on WhatsApp groups with like 20 cousins, but really there's that 1 or 2 cousin that you trust with your secrets and that you actually really, really like and want to meet up with them. My advice is to focus on those 1 or 2. And if you want to increase your relationships with other people, then there's 2 number 1 means I would suggest, which is phone calls and meetups, or FaceTimes, things like this. if we move on to the last fifth slide, my last myth, when you ask people at social media, they say there's some benefit, there's any benefit. Well, look, hyper-connectedness and hyper-distraction are the two outcomes of social media use. Those are the real two outcomes. The any benefit attitude and mentality, it's insidious and it's harmful. As literally any action in this world, you can justify if you have the any benefit, some benefit mentality or logic. And this will cramp anyone's ability to succeed in this world, whether it's Islamic knowledge or non-Islamic knowledge. Even drugs. There are teenagers who would argue that taking weed will help them better at exams because there's some benefit, because it helps calm them. But that's obviously a dangerous mentality, because we have a criterion called Islam, which makes us decide what is right and what is wrong. But if you have the any benefit mentality, it's going to really mess up teenagers and parents alike when it comes to deciding how to decide what tools to use. If we move on to the last slide, I think. So in conclusion, adopt a craftsman approach to tool selection. So like I said, these social media apps and our phones, these are all tools. The craftsman approach is essentially that if you think about someone who builds furniture, they will pick the best knives, the best tools to achieve the objective. So my suggestion when it comes to communication or producing work or and these type of things, then pick the best tools. Is social media the best way, or like Facebook, is that really the best way to keep your friends updated? Is it the best way to learn a topic? If you want to learn a topic like Islam or a specific issue in Islam like usul al-fiqh or the rules of marriage, then books are the best source by an accredited or qualified scholar. Or for example, a structured course on history if you want to become deep in a subject. If it's maintaining friendships, then calls, meetups are the best way, not by updating, for example, I mean, like some of my family are on pages like Muslim Mamas, and we'll talk about some of the side effects of being on groups like that. And one of them is definitely jealousy. But we'll talk about that later. But this is my advice. And the last point is treat your attention with respect. Our attention is a currency. We need to be careful with it and how we treat it. I have 3 points to recommend in terms of recommended reading. The first book teenagers and parents alike should read is called Deep Work, Rules of Focused Success in a Distracted World. It's by a very good professor. The second book is Outliers, The Story of Success. It talks about loads of examples of people who done really well, but it goes through exactly how they achieved it. And the model isn't the same for all of them, but it doesn't involve social media or phone usage. It involves a lot of intentional and concrete work. And the last book is called Tiny Habits. This is the guy who made social media addictive. Now, social media is addictive, but that also means we can make other things which are good in our lives addictive. So that's called Tiny Habits, the small changes that change everything, by Professor B.J. Fogg. And that's the end of my presentation. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair for the thoughtful presentation, Ghulam. So we move into our first breakout session, whereby the parents will have an opportunity to discuss the presentation that's just been presented. You'll have the opportunity to flag up any concerns, any questions that you parents have. So, Ghulam, would you like to split us up into groups, please, for the breakout session, inshallah?
Yeah.
Jazakallah khair. We're going to move on to our second presentation, which will be delivered by myself, which is on the topic of how social media is seen in the context of purpose of life and values. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a purpose as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us only for one purpose, and that is to worship Him. So fundamentally, our purpose of life is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what does that mean, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Worship means that in every aspect of life, we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, i.e. we refer our actions back to Islam. And whenever we undertake an action, we think about the fact that does Islam allow this action or not? So, for example, when I go to work, for example, does Islam allow me to do the work that I'm doing? Islam regulates our relationships. It regulates what we can eat. It regulates how society should function. It regulates the economy. So Islam regulates every aspect of life, and to ensure that we adhere to Islam, we are fulfilling the purpose of life which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set us, which is to worship Him. And what's interesting is that living in the West, social media has obviously taken sort of main stage, like Brother Ghulam mentioned. It's had a huge impact on our lives. And if we think about one concept that's pushed into society heavily, which is freedom. Freedom, allows people to do what they want. It allows people to believe in what they want as well. That's why we see some people doing all kinds of weird things because they believe that they are free to do whatever they want. We see people believe in all kinds of weird things as well because they believe that they're free to believe in whatever they want. And this concept of freedom, which allows people to do what they want, what they want to believe in, it's the same concept that drives wrong behavior on social media. So as a result of freedom, what we find is that some people, for example, especially amongst the youth, they would share inappropriate pictures online. People will carry out online crime as well because of the fact that they believe that there's freedom, and they believe in freedom, and they believe that because they are free to do whatever they want, and that there's no because they believe in freedom and they believe that they can get away with it, and that they are not accountable to any creator. As a result of that, people will do whatever they want and how they want, and this is why we see inappropriate behavior on social media. And unfortunately, inappropriate behavior, which encompasses various things such as inappropriate pictures, pornography, for example. All of this stuff is a result of freedom, because people believe in what they want, and they obviously believe the fact that they are not accountable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like we Muslims do. And Forbes, for example, so I've got a link at the bottom of the slide, which you probably can see. Forbes carried out some research, and they done an article on mental health, and what they found was that social media is a contributor is one of the biggest contributors to mental health, because like Ghulam mentioned in his previous presentation, when people are addicted to social media, they feel that they need to keep those people that are following them, they need to keep them pleased. And to some aspect, when people believe that they're living for others, that they want to please others, and they want to make themselves look good, they actually become a slave to that person. And as a result of that, if they can't keep those people happy, who are following them, as a result of that, people become anxious. They have mental health issues, they become stressed. And it's important to tackle this problem and to discuss this problem, which we are doing today. And there's many impacts of social media, and I've touched upon some impacts on this slide. For example, fake life. We know many people use social media to lie about their life. So I've sort of defined. When you go online, there's various definitions of what a fake life is, and using those various definitions, I've sort of come up with fake life. It's about presenting oneself with something which he or she may not have. I know. I'll give you one example of fake life. I know someone, for example, who photoshopped themselves in a Porsche. Now, this person didn't own the Porsche, but just to make themselves look good, they photoshopped themselves in a Porsche. And again, social media, fake life, is a big thing on social media, and people, they've got this. There's this sort of need, there's this culture that exists whereby it pushes people to, do all kind of things such that people, those that are addicted to social media, they have this drive to impress others, live a fake life, post pictures of themselves, of being on holiday or owning things, which they may not have, just to make themselves look good. And again, as Muslims, we need to be content with what we have. And Islam stipulates, we be content with what we have, and we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for what we have. Whereas the society we live in today, this pushes us to consume and build a false picture of our lives so that we can show off and make ourselves look good. And if you look on the right hand side, for example, I've got examples there and news articles from some leading mainstream news outlets. So for example, the Khalij Times, they had an article on social media influencers, and a social media influencer is the one who has a massive following, and a social media influencer is the one who says something, and people will tend to believe that person. And unfortunately, in today's day and age, there's many negative social media influencers as well as positive social media influencers. So there's many Muslim social media influencers that are good, that have a following, and to present Islam in the correct manner. And there's no harm in following such social media influencers. There's another article there, I've got from Thrive Global, titled, 4 reasons why people fake on social media. Again, there's this massive drive, in society, which is to basically lie about yourself and make yourself look good, show off about yourself, be arrogant about yourself. And again, this kind of culture, our children are growing up in this kind of culture, in this kind of environment where there's various values that are being pushed which are against Islam. And it's really important that we safeguard the values of our children, we safeguard the Islamic values of our children, and that we embed the correct Islamic values within our children. And at the bottom right, there's an article called Why Being a Fake is Bad for You, which was within the Telegraph. It was an interesting article, and the gist of the article was that when one's fake, when one presents a fake life on social media, like I mentioned earlier on, one becomes a slave to the person or to the people that are following that individual. There's this desire to always please people online, to make yourself look good, to present yourself in such a way which doesn't reflect your real life. And again, this kind of culture is heavily pushed in society, and people become stressed if they can't live up to expectations of others. And again, Islam teaches us to be content, and then we should present ourselves to others as we are in real life, and we should not live a fake life. Like I mentioned earlier on, Islam governs our life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set laws for us, and we need to abide by those laws. Social media isn't a bad thing in itself, just like a pen isn't a bad thing. A pen can be used to write something good, a pen can be used to write something bad. Similarly, social media can be used for good, it can be used for bad. Social media can assist us with our development of Islam. So for example, YouTube, I personally use YouTube to memorize Quran, to help me with my tajweed, because YouTube is quite helpful with that. And most importantly, Islam is a reference point for life. And what does that mean when I say Islam is a reference point for life? Meaning that whenever we have any problems in life, be it social problems, work problems, family problems, any aspect of life, we refer to Islam to solve those problems. And that's what it essentially means, that Islam is a reference point for life. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Hashr, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَمَا أَتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ وَمَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ شَدِيدُ الْعِقَابِ. Whatsoever Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has brought to you, take it, and whatever he has abstained you from, or has forbidden us from, leave it and fear Allah, and Allah is severe in punishment. And in the tafsir of this ayah, Ibn Kathir, he narrates a hadith from Rasulullah, whereby Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh, he said that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said that whatever I have ordered you with, do of it as much as you can, and whatever I've forbid for you, abstain from it. And again, this just reiterates the point that when it comes to social media, we need to use Islam to govern our usage of social media, just like we use Islam to decide how we pray Salah, how we fast, how we get married, for example. Similarly, in the same way, Islam needs to govern the usage of social media, because social media can be used to commit haram. And in light of that, it's really important that when we're on social media, that we use Islam as our reference point, and we embed this concept in our children as well. I.e., when it comes to social media, the use of social media is governed by Islam, because like I mentioned earlier on, our children, they're exposed to so much fitna, and it's scary at times when I think about it. And it's really important that our kids, our children, have the correct understanding of Islam. They have an understanding of the fact that Islam is their basis for life, is their reference point for life, so that when our kids grow up, as they grow up, when they use social media, which is a big aspect of life in the 21st century, that our kids know that when they use social media, their usage of social media should be governed by Islam, inshallah. So here's some evidences from the Quran and the Hadith. So fake news is a big aspect on social media, and Forbes, for example, they carried out some research, and what they said was that any person that takes news from social media, even if it's fake news, they tend to they would tend to believe those fake news pieces. So those who are addicted to social media, they have this sort of common problem of believing fake news. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Hujurat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu idha ja'akum fasiqum binabi'in fatabayyanu aw tusibu qawman bijahalatin fatasbihu ala ma fa'altum nadimin. O believers, if an evildoer brings you any news verified, so you do not harm people unknowingly, becoming regretful for what you have done. And again, Ibn Kathir in his tafsir of this ayah, he states that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us to verify news. And let's face it, in today's day and age, can we really trust some news outlets? We know that there's a common culture of fake news that exists in society today. And it comes back to that concept of freedom. People believe that they're free to do what they want, however, how they want, because they're not answerable to any creator. And when concepts like freedom become prevalent in society, we will see wrong like we see today. And unfortunately, the news that that we're exposed to today as parents, and which our children are exposed to as well, a lot of it is fake. And it's really important that we verify news before we accept news. There's a hadith about being humble, whereby Iyad ibn Himar reported that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Verily, Allah has revealed to me that you must be humble towards one another, so that no one oppresses another or boasts to another." And boast to another is a really important aspect, because, like I mentioned, on social media, people have the opportunity to show off, to be arrogant, to lie about their lives, whereas Islam teaches us to be humble, to be to be modest, and to ensure that we're not arrogant and we don't boast about things. Whereas society teaches us the opposite. Society teaches us to boast, to be arrogant, to show off about our lifestyle. Whereas Islam is the complete opposite. And again, it just reemphasizes that point that Islam needs to govern our life. And the last point on this slide, the evil eye, which we call nazar as well in Urdu. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to seek refuge from the evil eye of the jinn and the evil eye of the humans. And when the thorn were revealed, these are the two the two surahs, Surah Falaq and Surah Nas. When they were revealed, Rasulullah started to recite them and stopped reciting anything else. And again, when one shows off on social media, the jealousy arises from that. The evil eye arises from that, and showing off and being arrogant and boasting can cause, can cause the evil eye. Can cause the another as well. So that's why it's really important to protect oneself and to be modest and not to boast, because boasting and being arrogant can cause all types of issues in life. I've just got an example here of using a full fact, using a full fact website. So full fact is a website where one can go on to log into and verify news. And I've got an example here of a mosque article. So there was an image that was taken from a mosque within the UK before lockdown, before the first lockdown, which occurred in March, April, earlier this year. And someone posted this picture online, and someone accused the mosque of breaking, the rules of lockdown, because there were people standing next to each other. But then when this picture was verified, and it was confirmed that the picture was taken before lockdown. So again, it just reinforces the point that we need to verify our news, because not everything presented by social media is correct. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders us to verify the news that we read. So in conclusion, just got a few points here. Islam needs to govern our life and the use of social media. Ensuring that our life is governed by Islam, is a part of worship. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has created us to worship Him. And as a result of that, we need to ensure that every aspect of our life is governed by the deen. We need to ensure that we verify our news when we read news online. And the final point, which I think is a really important point, we should use social media to help us develop and to assist us in our development of Islam. Jazakallah khair. I'll move on to the next slide, which is the final slide for my presentation. Don't let your fingers and eyes testify against you on Yawm al-Qiyamah concerning social media. And I think this is a really important point to take home from my presentation. So we'll move on to our next breakout session. Again, the parents will have the opportunity to discuss my presentation, which I've just presented. And if parents have any concerns or any questions regarding my presentation, please feel free to discuss.
You as a shepherd. Each of you is responsible for his flock, i.e. the people. The ruler is a shepherd and he's responsible for his flock, the people. The man is the shepherd of the family and is responsible for his flock, i.e. the family. If you can go back for me, please, Amar. And the final part of the hadith says that a woman is a shepherd of her husband's household and is responsible for her flock, i.e. the family. So from this hadith, it's very clear that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put the responsibility of looking after those underneath us, i.e. our children that He has entrusted us with, under our responsibility, and we must care for them and we must protect them as best as we can. Now, next page, please. So what do you need to consider in terms of deciding how to protect our children? Different people have different takes. Here's a few ideas, and you can take what is best from this, inshallah, and combine it with your experience and knowledge, and inshallah you'll be able to protect your children in a very, very beneficial way. So for me, it's very important that you are clear on what apps you're going to allow your child to use and what you're going to say to them, actually, absolutely no. And we'll discuss apps a bit later on. Most apps work in a similar sort of way, but we'll go through a few. We'll look at the cons, the pros and the cons of these apps. Privacy. Now, where possible, encourage your children to use a shared password and an email. So for example, if everyone's using YouTube, you might have a laptop, you might have a YouTube on TV, you might have it on a mobile phone. It's best that we use one username, one ID. That way we can ensure that the content's being watched by everyone is appropriate. And if someone starts to fall down, we can help them, you know, we can encourage them, and we can try and bring them back onto the straight and narrow. In terms of in the house, you need to have some rules. You know, there should be times when technology is allowed, and there should be times when technology is not. People shouldn't be taking phones to their beds, for example. People shouldn't be taking tablets or laptops to their beds. You know, you shouldn't have these sort of things out when it's family time, for example, dinner time, or when you're around at someone else's house. Instead of engaging with those people, you know, you're on your device. And more importantly, we need to understand and explain to our kids that excessive use of anything can result in health issues, especially mental health issues if you're using a lot of social media, as it can, you know, we've spoken about before, you can become dependent on these. It's like a drug, it captures you. It can affect your mental health. It, you know, it creates depression. You need to know everything that's happened. And sometimes we become envious. You know, we see that people are doing better than us, which may not necessarily be true. It might just be for the screen, as the brothers have spoken about earlier, about fake lives. You know, you may think that actually they're a better parent because they spend more time with their kids, but they could be resurrecting pictures from the past. You know, they could be only coming together in order to take a photograph, and may not necessarily be true. However, if we can learn from that and use that to make ourselves and our relationship with the children better, then we should do. But most of the time you'll find that people just do this, you know, as to show off rather than to teach people about the importance and best ways of you know, raising their family. If we can move on to the next slide for me, please, brother. So there's some practical things that we can do in the house, and there's some practical things that we can do on the device to ensure our kids are kept safe and away from any harmful contents. So within the house, keep the devices in a central location. Don't allow children to have TVs, laptops, even PCs in their own rooms. You know, ideally keep them in a central location where everyone can go in and out. This will stop shaitan from coming in and sort of, you know, pushing us down the wrong path. And as discussed earlier, you know, there should be times when technology should not be used. You know, set a limit, and we'll go through how to set limits later. Set a limit on how long a device can be used for, when it can be used. You know, you can't be having a phone that you take to bed. You know, it affects your, there's a lot of studies, it affects your sleep, it disturbs your brain cycle. It doesn't allow you to relax. You know, when you're eating food, we shouldn't be staring into a screen. Instead, this might be an opportunity for the family to engage and discuss what's been happening during the day. Maybe a time for a laugh, a time for a joke. And also, you know, you can see exactly what you're eating and appreciate the effort that has gone into it. On the device, again, we'll go through in the next few slides in details, but on the device, make sure that you have the correct privacy settings. So age restrictions, inappropriate content is blocked, you know, agreed time limits per app, per day, you know, how long you can play games on your devices for, what you can basically do in terms of making sure that you're not stuck on one thing for an excessive period. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Now, one of the first things and the basics things that we should do is restrict the internet coming into our house. You can do this quite simply by logging onto your internet provider's account. So my account is, for example, is with Virgin Media, but you know, whether you have Sky, Talk, BT, whatever you have, you will have a username and password for your internet. If you go onto the internet provider's website and sign in, you will have an option nearly from all of the internet providers to stop inappropriate contents. And this is very important because this is all the internet coming into your house. And you can do a similar sort of thing with your mobile phone as well. So you can block, adult contents. If we move on to the next slide, you can see how child safe being enabled, and they go by different names, but Virgin Media calls it child safe, and you can see that the green at the bottom on My House is ticked, which means gambling websites, websites promoting gun violence, pornography is all blocked, so the kids are not going to come across this sort of stuff nilly-willy, but there's always a chance because technology does slip up. And again, we'll discuss later on about this. But make sure that your internet coming into the house is restricted as much as possible. And there's filters. You can block internet all the time. You can block internet during school times. You can block it during the day. You can block it during the night. Different providers give you different options. So if you want to allow your kids to play games in the evening from, say, for example, 7 o'clock till 9 o'clock, you can unrestrict it and you can set an option. If you only want to allow them to use the internet on the weekends, there's an option. I haven't taken a screenshot of that, but underneath, once you click this green box, gives you options of what you want to do and when you want to block stuff, and whether it's permanent or not. If we move on to the next slide, please. Now, in terms of on the devices, there's a number of things that you can do. Now, there's different software, there's different operating systems out there, there's different devices. The concept is similar, but we'll go through a couple of things that you can do, and I'll run through a couple of examples. But there is too many to discuss at this place at this time. You've got tablets, you've got computers, you've got TVs. There's too many devices. So, for example, on an iPhone, you can set a screen timer by simply going into settings on your iPhone and click on app limits. You can then choose a category. You can assign a time limit to each category. So, for example, the category of social media, you can say, actually, on this device, I only allow social media to be used for 50 minutes a day, half an hour a day, 2 hours a day, 3 hours, whatever limit you want to set. Any apps that fall into that category will be limited for that period of time. You can have a category for news, for example. You can have a category for internet browsing, and you can set limits on how much you feel is appropriate. You can have a category for games, and any apps that fall into that category will only be allowed to be used on that device for that period of time. If we move on to the next one, sticking with iPhones, you can also restrict the contents coming into your phone. So just like with your internet provider, by going into settings and then tapping contents and privacy, once you've typed in your password, you can then tap on restrict content. And over here, it gives you 3 options. So you can decide if you want to allow unrestricted access, if you want to block adult sites, or if you only want to give access to certain websites. So, there's three levels. So say, for example, if you only wish to allow your child to use websites that are related to your school, what you will do is you will type in those websites, and that phone will only be allowed to go and surf those websites. Again, it's something that you can play with. You can decide what works best for you, whether you want to limit adult content, or whether you want to limit, turn everything off except the few sites that you trust. If we move on to the next one, so let's have a look at a few Android devices now. With Android, it's very clever, actually. Google especially has an app called Family Link for parents. And what happens basically is you download this Family Link app on your own phone. So that's your own personal phone. And then if you're going to issue your child with a phone, with a device, then you download it on their device as well. But on your one, you choose that you're a parent, and on your child one, you choose child or teenager. And what you can do with this is quite clever. You can actually track the location of that device anytime. So if your son takes it to school or daughter takes it to school, you can see exactly where they are to keep them safe. Also, if they want to download or install any new apps, it will have to go through your device. You will need to give permission for your child's device to be to have that installed on there. And again, you can restrict the times that the device is used. So you can block the device from being used during school time. You can block it from being used in the evenings where it's madrasa time, for example. If we move on then, please. As we spoke about earlier with Android, you can also do a similar thing with, so this is a screenshot of what, what Google Family can do. Next one, please. Now, we spoke about limiting apps time earlier on. Similar thing can be done with Android devices as well. The only difference between Apple and Android is that on Apple, you restrict the category. So you give each category a certain amount of time. However, with Android, if you've got 10 apps that use social media, you'll have to assign how much time you want to spend on each one. And again, it's something to play with and something for you to decide what you feel is appropriate for your children. If we then move on to the next one for me, please. What I want to do now is look at, we're supposed to look at 5, but we may not have time to look at many social media apps, but we'll review a couple just so you can get an idea of what they do. And most of them work in quite a similar way. So most of us know about Facebook. We may have used Facebook, now on Facebook, you can upload pictures, share videos. Now there's a few pros, but there's a lot of cons. So unfiltered content, so you can't choose what you want to see on Facebook. It just pings up on your screen. The next article just comes up. And sometimes the articles, sometimes the pictures, sometimes the information could be quite gruesome, and it might not be appropriate for you or your children. So we need to be aware of that within Facebook. Also, there's lack of privacy. Once you put something on there, it's out there for a long time. Now, I'm aware I'm running out of time. Sorry, guys. We need to pray Maghrib soon, and we need to leave time for comments. But I'll just take a couple of more minutes to go through a couple of more apps. So if we move on to the next one, we're quite familiar with YouTube. Can we move on to TikTok, please? Now, those that have young children or growing children, you may have come across this app, TikTok. Very, very popular amongst the youth, short videos, a lot of content's on there. It's made some people very famous. Now there's, very little good in this app. We need to be very careful. It's very catchy, it's quite addictive. There are some very dangerous stunts on there, and most of the stuff is there for entertainment purposes. And my personal recommendation is this is something that you should avoid. Again, you have no control over the content. So, 1 minute you could be watching a video on cooking or about cars. Next thing, it will recommend to you people dancing around inappropriately, and our children shouldn't be exposed to this sort of stuff. We'll send the presentation out. You can read through the rest of the advice, the pros and the cons on the apps. If we can now move on to the next slide. And again, on Snapchat, just a very quick point. The brother spoke about earlier with regards to distorted images, imposing yourself where you're not. Snapchat is used wisely for this. So, this distorts the way people looks, their body size, their skin color, their skin tone, and this can make people quite jealous, those that have not been blessed in the right way. Those that have challenges with regards to their looks, this can make those kids very edgy. So be aware of this, that not everything on Snapchat and social media is true, and a lot of it is actually distorted. Can we move on to the next one, please? Move on to the next slide, please. Now, what can we do to safeguard our children? Monitor what your child is looking at. We might not be familiar with this up and coming technology as parents, unless you're quite up there with the tech, but our children do. Our children know how to use this stuff, and just by simply spending time with our kids, watching them, we can learn so much. And whether you know how to use technology or not, you will know whether the content's being looked at is halal or haram. And that's what we should be educating our kids on, the contents, rather than, you know, on how to use this stuff. And where possible, try and befriend your children, and get the family to befriend them as well, so they can see what your children are sharing and they can give them the correct advice. Where possible, divert your children's attention away from the internet. I have 4 young kids. Sometimes it's hard work. I work full time as well. You know, my kids are doing hifz as well, and they do that at home with me. So it takes up a lot of time. But on the weekends, I like to take my kids out. You know, we go cycling, we do cricket, we do badminton. You know, I spend time with them making things. And technology can be used for that. You can, you know, put up YouTube and you can put on there how to make a castle from paper, how to, you know, how to make an aeroplane that flies, and you can have challenges. And doing these things with your kids will keep them away from social media. It will keep them engaged, and it will keep them away from the wrong things. Read with them, you know, discuss with them Islam, discuss with them what has happened at school, and teach them that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as it says here, you know, he warns us that do not call each other by rude names. You know, we should teach our children that. And the most important thing is to actually build a strong relationship with your child, so that your child can come to you whenever they are in trouble. And there's a brother I met recently, and he said something amazing. He said, look, a lot of the time I never used to do bad because I knew what my dad liked and what my dad didn't like, and I didn't want to upset my dad, and because of that I stayed away from bad things. We're going to finish off with the biggest protection that we have with regards to our children, and that is asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, no matter what you do, no matter what you teach your child, no matter how much effort you put in, without the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are nothing. And the biggest, you know, the biggest tool that we have is, the biggest aid that we have is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is a nice dua that we should read as much as we can for protection for ourselves and for our children. You know, وقولي قولي هذا واستغفر الله العظيم. جزاك الله خير.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Jamal. We were going to move into our third breakout session, but unfortunately, due to shortage of time, and also Maghrib is upon us now as well, we'll use the final few minutes just to ask parents if they've got any further comments, if parents have any suggestions for future topics. So over to the parents. You know, if there's any suggestions or comments that parents would like to raise, please feel free. Ghulam, I've just got a quick question myself, if I may ask a question. So you know, in your presentation, you know, you mentioned if one wants to study, one should study using books rather than going online, which is a valid point. But one may argue that, you know, the internet essentially, you know, has become like a knowledge base. You know, there's everything available on the internet now. You know, I was doing some reading whereby, for example, the culture of going to university, that may sort of die out in the next few years because of the fact that everything's available online now. So what would you say to those who say that, you know, yes, using books, it's good, but that's something of the past, and you know, everything's